Okay, so we're going to quickly transition into panel one if the moderator and panelists can come up to the stage. And so this discussion for the next 50 minutes is going to be around building momentum, navigating challenges, and unlocking opportunities. So it should be a dynamic discussion. And then after that, we're going to go into networking and coffee break for like a little 10-minute break. Thank you.
Welcome to the Bermuda Infrastructure and Development Summit, first annual one. Very excited to be here. And I am up here with a star-studded cast who needs little to no introduction. So I'll start with myself because you're probably wondering who's talking. Daniel Woods, president of Compound Property Group. We deal with basically all things professional services to do with real estate. I'm a registered valuer and I am also a BEDC board member. To my left, I have the great Alison Swan, director of Swan Group of Companies. To her left, we have Mr. Dennis Fagundo, managing director of D&J Construction. Then, carrying on, we have Ms. Tika Gilbert, who is the founder of TGA Architects and is also the president of the Bermuda Institute of Architects in Bermuda. To her left, we have Ms. Victoria Cordeiro, who is the director of planning. And then last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Marico Thomas, who is today wearing the hat, I would assume, of Chamber of Commerce president. So without further ado, we're going to get right into it. As you guys can see, the topic for today is navigating challenges and unlocking opportunities. There is quite a few takeaways that I'm hoping that we can all get as a, just collaborative, as everyone can just get something to take away to have in their conversations with the rest of their groups and stakeholders in their respective fields. And I'm just going to start with, I guess we'll start with Marico since I introduced you last. What would you consider, as we're talking about challenges, some of the most pressing challenges that Bermuda faces right now in the development or just housing environment?
Hello. Thank you very much. Loved what you're doing and what Enrique has started. I'd like to be able to color maybe with a couple of data points that will be helpful. Bermuda's population has declined, but from a household demand is rising. This has to do with the fact that the average household size in Bermuda has dropped from about 3.4 people living in one house to about 2.08 people living in one house. And that really means that we need more homes. Even if we have fewer people, so the population can go down, but we still need increased housing. Secondly, we have 3,700 dwellings, but only 28,200 are active. That leaves about 3,500 homes unexplained, off market, unavailable, or somehow entangled. We just don't know where they are. Construction costs are going up. They're now running about 650 to 700 per square foot, so there is that expense. And whether you rent or you have a mortgage, 65% of the residents say their housing payments have gone up. Very popular, people think about vacation rentals. Vacation rentals, for our numbers, show that it's 136 less units being advertised and an average of 95 less units that are being booked. So it's actually a much smaller component of what we're talking about when it comes to housing. And also, it should be said that the bank lending, they are lending, but it is a tighter market. 100% mortgages are well over. But you've got to consider also that in the US, the 30-plus day loans delinquency is at 1.8%, but in Bermuda it's actually at 5.3%. That really means that they've got to offer some protection to themselves, and then it helps them to be a little bit more tight. Affordable housing, what is affordable and how do you get to affordable housing? And then one kind of really interesting piece is that 42 of the hospital's 90 acute care wing beds are occupied by people who don't need to be there. So 42 of the 90 beds, the people don't need to be there, and on some days there's 30 hospital beds set up in hallways. I can talk to you later on about the impact of that, but ultimately it just means that slower service, higher costs, and it's just not a good thing. So you've got to take your people home. Sorry, but that's simple. So to answer your question, just giving a little bit of that context, what can we do to unlock? Vacant and second dwellings. what is vacant? We have this big impression about what vacant is, and it has to be said also that one person's derelict is another person's home. We have a serious housing shortage. We got to figure out how to build. Unlocking is going to take something different happening with planning. It's going to have to take something different happening with financing. It's going to have to take something different happening with the government in terms of incentives and financial or tax sort of relief. A lot of conversation that I'm involved in, or the chamber's involved in, we come across people and organizations who say, I've done enough, or we're doing our part, and the reality is that we estimate that we might need somewhere in the region of about 3,500 residences if we were aiming at a population of 70,000. I remember when I was younger, we had a population of 68. So just imagine that we had a target population of a number, and that target population meant that we needed another 3,500 residences. If that is the number, just hypothetically, then nobody can say that they've done enough. We all have to come at this very differently. Everybody has to be challenged. Somebody's going to be unhappy. Most of us are going to be unhappy as we compromise. So the first thing that we actually have to do to unlock this is get out our own way and stop with the heels that are dug in. And we have to be courageous to say the uncomfortable thing. We've got to understand that we're all going to take a little bit of pain, or the alternative is what? No IB, not enough people to live in homes. We all club up, and I'm living with Marico now. She doesn't like that. I snore. Thank you, sir.
Okay, no, that was awesome. I appreciate that. Appreciate that for sure. So switching gears, yeah. So switching gears, we mentioned construction costs, and I was just hoping that, Dennis, you might be able to tap in on essentially is there any alternative methods? I know that, one of the issues, we see all of those large buildings and whatnot, but if you're a developer, you're going to be looking to sort of get a return on your investment, right? Nobody does it for the sake of just doing it, unless it's the government. So is there, just share your thoughts.
Sure. Particularly on the larger scale projects, a lot of effort goes in on the front end to determining the most effective way, the most cost-effective way of building. So, and within the Department of Planning, within the regulations, there are avenues that exist for doing new things. Your hands aren't tied as a developer or as an architect or from an engineering perspective, particularly. And our building codes are not anything all that unusual. They're based on international building codes, and you're layering on top, Bermuda's wind speed and Bermuda's exposure to the elements and those sorts of localization factors, but it's nothing particularly sort of strange and unusual. So our biggest challenges really are sort of that first cost of the materials overseas, and where we've seen, during the pandemic, post-pandemic, you saw the effect of that, where a sheet of plywood went from $100 a sheet to $1,000 a sheet, and then it's sort of settled out, in this first cost in the U.S., right? And those prices have settled back down again somewhat, but not completely. We've seen where the local quarries have been tapped out, right? So there is no more large-scale local material available to be quarried and turned into sand and turned into aggregate for concrete. So now all of the concrete is now made with imported aggregate. Obviously, that's considerably more expensive than, driving down the road and scooping it up. So those they're not levers that we really have available to sort of pull on to say, here's a magic bullet that we can just all of a sudden fix the cost of construction. From a purely sort of structural perspective. The other sort of more behavioral, sort of psychological impact we're seeing is that people's understanding of what, and it was interesting in in Margaret's survey data, people's understanding of what sort of a basic versus middle range versus high end has evolved quite considerably between Instagram and Pinterest. Like it's really quite amazing to watch, right? Like where 15 years ago, you'd go down the shop and buy whatever shower head was on the shelf, and nobody would even think twice. And now it has to be this exact one with this exact flow rate, and it's got to have the right aesthetic, and it's got to have the right. and all of that costs money. And there's nothing, it's a value thing, right? It's not that there's anything wrong with that, but if you're chasing affordable housing, then you have to make affordable decisions, and that has to form part of that decision-making process. And that, so, I often have the conversation, well, are you looking to do this work as an investment where you want a return on your money, where you want, where how much you can sell it for eventually makes a difference? Or are you trying to develop this property because you want it exactly the way you want it and it's your forever home? Because how you make those decisions are very different, right? Like
100%.
So where we see, and so we tend to see a huge range, and it always makes me a little nervous when people start quoting like $1 per square foot. What does it cost to build a house? Because, I've seen anything from $400 to $2,500 a square foot, depending on how much somebody wants to spend on, a space that makes them feel just a certain way.
Yeah.
So when we talk about affordable housing, I think it's really important to look at, your baseline cost of construction for something that is affordable, but you've still got a gap where it's more expensive to build it than you can rent it or sell it for. And so how do you fill in that gap, right? And so far, much of the effort from government is on how do you reduce the cost. But because the majority of that cost is an overseas problem, we don't have levers to pull on. So, we can reduce duty, and that's wonderful, and it helps, but it doesn't move the needle enough to make a difference on the affordable housing side. Something like minimum wage will never change it enough, because people earning minimum wage are not providing enough value to businesses to raise that minimum wage so much that they can afford the types of rents that it takes to build at what somebody believes is a middle sort of the road value. So, the only thing that I've seen that has sort of been shown to work in other places is that sort of the U.S. affordable housing sort of Section 8 type schemes, where you have private industry developing and therefore focused on cost and focused on trying to bring costs down, and you have some sort of a mechanism in there that either government or an agency of government is responsible for, that basically provides the difference in revenue between what an affordable rent is and what market rent is, and sort of fills in that gap. And it's far more efficient doing something like that than to have government actually develop or build themselves. Because as we've seen, that doesn't tend to be the most cost-effective way of providing housing.
No, not at all. So switching gears, we have Tika, architect hat, and then we also have Victoria with the planning hat. What would, I know we spoke about it offline, Victoria, but what would you say is some of the, how can we get ahead of the issues that we face? Like, because developers, the first point of contact should be planning. And I know that it should be essentially a mutual effort between the two to guide with the architect, planning, and the client. So we want to just speak on that and what challenges you sort of see and how can they be faced?
Absolutely. So if anyone knows me, they'll always know that I'm one to say, please engage with planning as early as possible. Even people that are looking to buy property, considering purchasing a piece of land in the city even, come and talk to planning first. Get a good understanding as to what the relevant planning policy would allow for that particular site. That then gives you a greater sense of security with going forth with such a huge investment. Obviously, minimizing risk is huge for that investment. Oftentimes, planning is an afterthought. People get architects involved, engineers, design the scheme, right, this is what we want, client is happy, they're like, great, we've reached a solution that works for me and my family or my business or whomever, and okay, now let's go to planning. And they get to planning, it's like, well, actually, you've designed something that there's going to be a bit of a challenge here, and it may not work for the context of the area. It may not work for this particular site because hey, did you know you've got nature reserve right here or ag reserve, and you really should have come and talked to us first. So unfortunately, we still find many instances where people are jumping the gun and going full steam ahead with developing a scheme, forgetting planning entirely, about having the conversation. And it's not just about the planning department. The planning department has to engage with a significant number of other stakeholders within government, Department of Health, Department of Environment. Each of these different stakeholders, public works, highways, parks, you name it, everyone has their own legislative remit that they have to satisfy. Now, all of these other stakeholders, planning almost becomes like the depository for all of that advice and technical expertise. So the planning department already can foresee what potential challenges might actually be there for a certain proposal. So during a pre-consultation process, we can say, hey, you may want to consider engaging with the Department of Health on this particular element, because that eventually will save time, and time is money. Right? So, and when it gets to the construction stage, they just want their permit. We accept there are current challenges with respect to permitting issues right now. In my work with reaching out to key stakeholders, such as the IBA, Tika and I meet quite frequently. I meet with the engineering group as well, the chamber as well. We discuss what are the issues that are coming to your table. How can we reach a consensus on how to move this dial forward in terms of, okay, we need to streamline our procedures. What does that look like? But guess what? It's not just about the planning department revising their procedures. It's about understanding the requirements from a legislative point of view, but also architects, industry. This is what we need from you. So let us help you by you helping us. And that's ultimately what the message is that we want to get across to everybody, is that we want to be partners in all of this. We do not want to be adversaries. It is absolutely crucial that we work together and collaborate and be stakeholders all involved in this process together, because it does take everybody. Yeah. So, again, we want to be advocates for development. Our development plans speak to sustainability and the need to encourage development, whilst also doing that in a sensible manner. We have to be sustainable in protecting our green assets, historic assets, et cetera. But there's by no means whatsoever should anyone interpret the Department of Planning as the Department of No, which I know is a favorite saying that's been going on. So we just, want to make that clear that that is certainly not our mantra, despite what folks may say.
No, I'm sure you've heard it all before, so for sure. Marico, you want to add a point?
Yeah, if I could. We have a construction division inside of the Chamber of Commerce, and of course they will speak to a lot of things involving planning as well. But it's got some interesting numbers, if I can just say them aloud, that I'm hoping that the planning director will speak to. So some things that affect planning and permit delays, 60 to 75%, if this is true, 60 to 75% of planning applications that are submitted are deficient.
Yep.
And of the building applications that go in, the building permits, 10% are complete, which means that 90% are incomplete. And I've heard that with other government departments, like even immigration, that they're saying if they can get more complete work, then they can actually go faster. So I just thought that maybe you should say something about that.
Yeah, trash in, trash out, right? Seriously, right?
Trash in slow.
Yeah.
And then trash out.
Tika, would you be able to speak on, I guess, the planning application and from the architect standpoint of like how, we can make that more efficient, or why we're having sort of skip steps in a sense?
Yes, I think, so when I have someone that comes to me for any sort of application, in most cases, I like to go in for a pre-consultation. And with the pre-consultation, you kind of just duke everything out quite early.
Get it all on the board. Yeah.
Yes. But then you start to think about when you do a planning application or a building control application, there is a vetting list that you should be able to pull together all the information required for the application, so that when you do submit it, planning has all the information that's required for approval, and building control as well. And as they talk about the statistics of incomplete applications, in most cases, because everyone is submitting applications, not just architects, you will have a case where there is incomplete applications. For architects, like Victoria said, we meet on a regular basis because sometimes we do have problems as architects because our applications have been in for too long. And we're trying to discuss how do we streamline that. Some time ago, we used to have a one-day permit where you can go in on a Tuesday and we have something come out by the end of the week.
That sounds lovely.
Which was great, but it's much different now.
Yeah.
And then there's the other issues. You have the large developments that go straight through the process, and then they're rejected. Then it goes to the ministers, and then it comes to an architecture advisory panel, which I sit on.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have the large projects at the pre-consultation stage, I think that they should also come to the architects advisory panel, so that we can have a discussion and see if there's anything that can be implemented or taken out, so that you do have that smooth process.
Yeah,
And then
try to
you
check
don't
all the
have to-
boxes ahead of
Yes.
time. No, for sure. So, Alison, and we're going to just do another shift here. We see all of these lovely developments in the ARS. You're very familiar with both local and international investors and different persons who would be interested in development. What do you find as sort of the obstacles that a lot of people face, whether it's either the banks or whatever the case may be?
Well, so before you can get to planning and before you can get to constructing, as a developer, you have to have a case for development. We look at things all the time, unfortunately, we haven't found a lot of cases for development in recent times. And, the numbers are just not working out. As we go through these deals, we're just looking at the numbers from a local developer's perspective, which is different because our pockets are smaller than sort of the big guys, right?
Sure.
But from a local developer's perspective, it is very hard to make the numbers work. The banks are highly regulated, and they are very regulated on what they can do in terms of lending.
Yeah.
So that I think a lot of people don't realize. For developers, we are constrained. The banks are constrained in how they lend to us, and sometimes that most of the times it makes it so that
It's not worth it.
It's not. We
Yeah.
can't do it. We've kicked the tires on a bunch of things, and then you look at, if we go to try and look for foreign investment, because you can't collateralize the loan, it makes that sort of impossible as well. So you can't say, oh, can you invest $50 million into my project? Oh, P.S. by the way, you can't take the property back should we default on the loan. That they're not interested in that.
Makes it very tricky for sure.
So it's very tricky, and we're looking to try and find sort of creative financial.
That's just what I was going to ask, yeah.
And so we've looked at things like, could we do a REIT? But REITs, the nature of REITs, for instance, is that the property needs to be stabilized before it can go into a REIT. So the developer is still taking all the development risk, things can get held up through the entitlement process, getting the work permits. It could take years. It could take a year just because maybe you have a brownfield site. Maybe there's stuff that has to be mitigated. Maybe there's a building that has, oh my God, I go in there, there's asbestos. So the developer takes all the risk on the front end, and also potentially gets most of the reward. But that building needs to be stabilized before it can go into sort of a REIT-like structure.
Okay, awesome. Is there, and this is a question for anyone up here, is there any regulatory framework that could be changed or adapted that would be beneficial to development, or at least enhancing and, just getting
The
more?
banking framework needs to change. I mean, that's a fundamental thing. We can't finance these projects. Nobody can build unless, you have your own source of capital.
Yeah,
So,
large upfront investment. I think, what was the next point that we was I'm just going to go to my list then. So, Victoria, coming back to you, what opportunities exist for streamlining the development approval? I know it was something we spoke about offline. What do you have in the works for planning department right now to sort of assist with just efficiency?
Sure. So I'll speak to the kind of here and now. So as I mentioned earlier, or rather as Mr. Thomas mentioned earlier, the degree to which applications that are submitted that are missing some pretty basic stuff. Right now that takes human time away from actually assessing and reviewing permits and planning applications. So it was recently announced in the media that government has hired an individual to look at AI opportunities. And so the first assignment has been given to the Department of Planning, which is great. And we are actually already looking at ways in which we can utilize AI for initial vetting procedures. So perhaps, and of course, as everyone may already know, we are completely paperless with our system, have been so since 2019. So we're hoping to build some AI into that system so that once folks submit their applications, the vetting process can initially be undertaken through the use of AI. So, and this would be extremely helpful because right now, having to use the human exercise, that takes time away from what I was saying earlier, to actually getting on to properly doing the work. If we can eradicate that piece altogether, then that frees up significant officer. It's quite amazing how time-consuming it is writing back to folks saying, well, you're missing this, this, and this, and this. I mean, some of these shopping lists, as I call them, can be as much as 20 items. And that's pretty regular. I mean, when you're talking about roughly 10%, if we're lucky, of permits coming in with absolutely everything that we require, that's what we're getting. I mean, no wonder it's taking so long to get through. And then, of course, folks that have submitted a great permit submission, they're having to wait while we get through the ones before it that we've had to, obviously give a service to. So using AI in that regard, I hope can be a bit of a game changer in that respect. The other piece that I want to speak about is the department has been making great strides in putting together a completely different framework in respect of putting together new development plans that have a more flexible approach. So, and it started with the Northeast Hamilton Plan, which the BEDC obviously are well aware of, and which has supported their efforts with, trying to drive development forward in Northeast. And that was kind of the first plan we commenced with. Now we've moved on to the City of Hamilton Plan, which is a plan that now, it seeks to put the emphasis on placemaking. Seeks to remove a lot of the predetermined parameters of, well, you can only have so many stories in this district. Oh, and you need this setback over here. And if you go above 5 stories, you start needing additional setbacks. Yeah. It's about allowing more discretion to be inserted into the process. And why are we doing this? Because number one, that's the results of all the stakeholder engagement that we've had. This is what has been asked for the department to do, and we thought, well, heck, we want to do this as well, so let's get on with it. But what we've experienced is that through the consultation process of preparing these new development plans, is that we're getting a lot of positive reaction from it. People are like, oh, wonderful, especially the architects. They have discussed that the existing planning framework has really hampered their ability to really exercise architectural design. So with this new style of plan, it allows the architect to really come up and develop their own vision with their client, present something that works for the context of the site, of the area, that fits into the whole emphasis of, placemaking. And hopefully, in essence, that the department can start supporting a lot of these proposals, because up to this point, let's say, and I'll pick out 2 as real-world examples. You've got Brookfield on Front Street. With the new city plan, there is a real potential that all can be supported. The building on the corner of Victoria Hall, the former Victoria Hall, that was recently refused by the board, not because the department wanted for the board to refuse it, but we simply couldn't because of the restricted parameters within the existing policy framework of the City of Hamilton Plan. So those are 2 projects right there which could have gotten approval quite some time ago, but because of that existing policy framework, which we're now trying to change, it prompts the applicant to seek approval in another means, which is through appeal. And that's time consuming. Right? So that affects timelines and business plans.
Red tape and whatnot. So we mentioned earlier, we have quite a bit of we have quite a bit of derelict, and a lot of people have second units in their properties that they're not renting out. Marico, I know you touched on it at the last data drive I was at. Do you want to just share some points on that, and how do we potentially unlock those units? Because that's a large amount of supply that's basically just sitting there and not really, conducive to the Bermuda's environment.
Round numbers, 31,000 dwellings, 28,000 households, leaving 3,500 dwellings unaccounted for. How many of those are vacant? How many of those? Show of hands, who knows somebody that has a house and has maybe an apartment attached to the house and the apartment is not rented? Just show of hands. Look at all that. That's a lot, just in this room. What's the cause of that? And how do we solve that? There's a lot of things that we've been talked about, the Landlord-Tenant Act and a whole lot of other things, right? And we've got to move those things ahead. We've got some sticky bits that have been talked about for a very long time. And the other interesting thing is that it's just no one thing. We've identified at least 20 reasons for why there are property or housing-related issues, and some of them seem small, and some of them are much bigger than they seem, but none of them really seem to have anybody really pushing them.
Mm-hmm.
And that really comes down to us not having a national
plan
to, yeah, trying to be nice about it, but yeah, okay, fine, we need to. And so let's say something really unpopular in terms of unlucky property. Eminent domain.
Yeah.
Someone said eminent domain. If somebody has property that's sitting out there not doing anything for way too long, whether it's vacant or unoccupied, you are doing a public disservice.
Yeah.
Someone says that property should be taken back. The government should pay the value of that property so it's fair, but that property then becomes part of the government stock, who then improves it or fixes it up and puts it back into the community to be rented and used. It's unpopular, but we have to get to the point of saying unpopular stuff like that, building a list, looking at it and saying, listen, how do we get to 70,000 people, if that's what the target? Pick a number. I don't care what the number is, but pick a number.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to agree on some sort of a number, so we have some sort of a target, so we can all get behind it. It doesn't make a difference if the number is right. This isn't about being right. It's about having the courage and the conviction to get behind an idea and have everybody moving and marching towards it, knowing that we're going to have some shared pain.
Yeah, so
We don't have that.
So they did something like that in Birmingham. It was an act that was put together, and it was basically, you got a fair market value of a property that, and if it had been sitting there for, I think it was over 7 years, then compulsory purchase, and it was pulled back into the drawer, and that's how you just got things flowing. So I think it's something that definitely could be looked at. Bermuda is a small environment, so I'm not sure how, it's one of those things, right? Are we going to go on the side of sensitivity, or are we going to go on the side of basically, addressing what we'd consider to be a national need?
We would have a new housing minister as soon as we do it.
Yeah.
Part of the shared pain, right? That's serious. We have to have that collective courage.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we don't fix it.
So
Your kids are going to be living in a tent.
Jeez, don't wish that on me.
Or a job.
But no, so just mentioning Birmingham, is there any other jurisdictions that are doing things that anybody up on the panel right now thinks that could be something that we could utilize here, right? We always look at Cayman as our neighbor for different reasons, but not to specify them. But is there anything that you guys see being done else in the world that we think that could really work in Bermuda?
I do. I spent some time in the UK working on urban development, and I was just talking to Victoria because I worked with a lot of developers. Does anyone from the UK know about the Barclay Group or Crest Group?
Mm-hmm.
The UK government has the community infrastructure levy, and anytime the developers come in, they give back to the local council, and then that money is used to fund any affordable housing or schools.
Yeah.
Goes back into hospitals or community centers, I think that would be an interesting thing.
So it's basically a law, if they're going to come in and invest and develop and,
They-
profit off of X, then they have to put a percentage of such to Y.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Reinvest
That's
into
all.
the island.
That makes
And
complete sense.
The other thing that they have as far as affordable housing, and it's not just affordable housing either, but with the large developments, instead of having, say for instance, we have a 2-bedroom house. The 2-bedroom can be a 2-bedroom, 3-person house, or a 2-bedroom, 4-person house, which means that if a family has a boy and a girl, they don't have to share the room. You can have 2 single rooms or a double room. So when you have the developers, they come in, they already know what the square footage, what they want to spend for the square footage. What they will do is they'll come in and say, well, we want a 2-bed, 3-person house or a 4-bed, 5-person house. And that way they can, with the property that they have, they already have in mind the size dwelling units that they want to have. So that's probably something that
Should
Bermuda
definitely be
can
looked at.
implement as well.
Yeah. Victoria, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just was going to explain that in the new City of Hamilton plan, we've done a little bit of what you're discussing through a policy called the community benefits policy. So, for instance, as you mentioned, let's say a developer comes in and meets the threshold based on the size of the development. A part of that development needs to be putting a small percentage back into like a fund to service community benefit projects. So working with the Corporation of Hamilton, we've already discussed about how to identify certain projects, perhaps within the city, that need some attention, whether it's a small parkette in an area that perhaps is lacking in green space for residents nearby or just, people visiting the city. We've already set that frame of reference within the City of Hamilton plan, and we're really excited to test it out. We have talked with key stakeholders about the implementation of this piece. I know that some developers may seem a bit resistant to doing something of that nature, but I mean, by and large, this is very commonplace in other jurisdictions. And I think if, let's say, for instance, a developer comes in and says, well, I want X number of stories on this site with this type of use, and let's say that it doesn't quite meet, the policy initiatives within the city plan, but hey, I'm prepared to give X towards this initiative for the greater good, for the community benefit, then the Department of Planning will be like, oh, you know what? Hey, on balance, this is a great idea. This is absolutely worth recommending for approval. Development Applications Board, here's the benefits of this proposal.
Yeah.
This is what it's delivering. It could be, delivering a range of housing types, which clearly meets the need of what we've been talking about this whole time. And at the same time, the community gets something, right? So it's about balance.
No, for sure. Go ahead, Dennis.
I think there's a lot of benefit in adding flexibility into the planning process. I would say, though, that our starting point is what are the challenges with affordable housing? What are the challenges with development? And if our big challenge at a macro level, at 20,000 feet, our big challenge is that it costs more than the revenue will support. And that fundamental problem is what causes, that's the source of a financing issue, right? If you made enough money on it, you'd get financing for anything, right? But there's not enough margin in there. So we have to be very careful with sort of starting from the assumption that the developer is making a lot of money, or the developer is unfairly profiting off of. If that were the case, then you'd see development, you'd see financing being easy to get. But fundamentally, that's the main reason why things aren't happening, is that there's not enough revenue to pay for the development. So we have to bear that in mind, and when we look at adding steps to the process or adding more friction into the system, every time we add friction into the system, it creates more cost. Whether that's regulation, whether that's the definitions. The definition of an old building versus an historic building. Just because something's old doesn't make it historical. And if it's a ruin and if it's gone beyond, it's not a museum piece anymore. You tie up a lot because it's just old. That doesn't, like,
Spot
what
on.
do? Put a tarpaulin over it and have Daniel's kids living under the tent? Like,
Jeez, can we stop putting this on the kids, please?
But, we have to sort of loosen our definitions in our minds a little bit around those sorts of things. If we talk about sort of vacant properties or places that are sort of stuck, they can be stuck because they're derelict. They can be stuck because there's, because a family can't get it through probate because they can't afford to pay the death tax on the transfer. It could be stuck for, a multitude of different reasons. There could be defects in title that go back generations.
All
and
costs money to figure out.
You can't get it through the courts in order to resolve that defect in the title to be able to then take the next step and do anything with it. So, there's, and many of the properties where people now have, an apartment sitting vacant, when you're paying a mortgage and you first bought a place and you need that extra revenue, it's being rented and you're scrounging for every dollar to make sure you get through. When the mortgage is paid off and now you're sort of relaxing a little bit and your kids are to an age where they're living on their own, and instead of having 2 kids in the house with the parents, you kick the kid into the apartment, give yourself some privacy finally. Well, it's not being rented anymore. And changes your household sizes and your averages, and so we just have to, looking at the problems at a very high level, if the foundational problem is one of the cost versus the revenue, you're not going to fix that by making things more restrictive or making them more expensive. So, I think increasing the flexibility in planning, it kind of comes down to the idea that, the people coming behind are just as intelligent as we are now, right? So we shouldn't be making, sort of like if you look at a development plan, we're saying now that this is what we think these areas should be, used for, and then locking that down for whatever the cycle is, another 10 years or something. And yet you see flexibility is warranted because you'll have broad support for a development that is outside the scope of the plan, and therefore it has to go through this alternative process to get an approval. Whereas if the plan had that flexibility and now sounds like it will
It's
have more
going
of that,
towards that way, yeah.
then you're getting to a place where sensible decisions can be made early on, rather than having your hands tied by a decision somebody made 10 years ago.
For sure, for sure. So we're coming up to the last little bit. I think Eureka just gave me the little nudge. So we're going to go to Alison, then we're going to go to Marico. I know I had a little blank there. And then we're going to open up the floor for some questions.
No, I mean, I really I'm very happy about the new legislation about the $50 million and about opening up to foreign investment. I think all of that will help. I think that, in California where I used to live, they had a scheme where so the developers could come in, and so the properties were much more dense, so it might be something that we'd have to work on planning with, where you create density. Because if you create dense projects, then you're able to sort of get more out of them. But each floor would have to have affordable housing, even in a luxury project. So maybe it's a case of where let's say you have a 60 unit building. At least 6 of those units have to be affordable housing. Now these could be housing for sale. It doesn't necessarily have to be housing for rent, but at a price point where people can afford, perhaps with some sort of loan guarantee for the people who are buying it, working with the banks. So, I mean, I think that there are creative ways to do it, because the developers are not going to build it if they can't make money.
100%.
But there's no reason why you can't combine the two, so that you can create housing for affordable housing, and you can create a luxury product.
No, for sure. And Marico?
Sure. Data hat again. The Chamber did do a pretty deep dive and has a lot of data around housing, and we're going to do that presentation. We did it one before, but we're going to do it again just to make sure everybody understands. But because we're the first panel and it's early in the day, I'm hoping that everybody can take 2 data points with them throughout the course of the day. And these are helping to frame the context of the conversation. Number one, if we were to accept a target of 70,000, just making up a number, we just have to get behind a number. Let's say the number was a population of 70,000. We need to have 2,500 more units. So whatever your solutions are, it's not for 6 or 10 or 24 or 120, even though it sounds like a lot. We need 2,500. Yeah, that's number one. Number two, to what you were both talking about when it comes to planning. We are building 7 units per month. At this rate, it would take 30 years to hit that number. So we need to change a lot of stuff, our attitudes, our thinking, if we want to have any momentum at all. And the thinking needs to be ballsy and big and courageous, and you need to piss off the person next to you, otherwise we're not doing nothing. You gotta say something uncomfortable today, otherwise you're wasting time.
That was fantastic. So I was going to ask everyone for their call to action for the rest of the audience, but I think Marico has just sort of summed it up for everyone. Go say something ballsy, uncomfortable to the person next to you, and go back to your office. Make sure that you guys are helping, not put my unborn kids on the tents. I'll open up the floor for questions. Mr. Rigo. The better-looking Rigo, I might add.
Thank you. This question's for Dennis and/or Tika. One thing I do know is that Bermuda, we've been building houses exactly the same way as we have done pretty much for the last 400 years. It's block or it's stone, slate roof, or some iteration of the same. But we're building things in exactly the same manner. What can you guys tell us, looking in the future, if we're going to make things affordable, that there's some light at the end of the tunnel with respect to better building methods?
We spoke about it beforehand, so anyone want to jump on it? Keep that answer short.
I would say I've been looking at some modular building aspects. I know Dennis will say it's going to be expensive because it's going to be built overseas and brought in. But my thought is how can government or anyone get involved by training Bermudians or anyone and bringing the materials on the island and configuring everything here, assembling everything here, and then taking it to site so you can then stack everything up like a Lego. And then when you have the larger developments, the 6th floor development or whatnot, we can start looking at it like a cruise ship. I mean, you use bathroom ports and stuff like that, which can look very, very sleek and beautiful. If you're doing something luxurious, or you can do something very simple if it's something affordable. So I think it's ways of doing it. We just need to look into it a bit more.
Any 2 cents you want to add, Dennis?
Sure. So it can be. So we've conducted the exercise on probably 5 different developments over the years. The most notable one would have been when we were part of one of the teams that didn't win at the hospital. So the tipping point tends to be repeatability. So how big the scale of the development. So if you've got 300 units that are all exactly the same, then modular construction you start to achieve those economies of scale. Whereas if you have 20 units and they're all slightly different, then you don't. Because you have to overbuild it in order to be able to transport it. And the equipment requirements, so the craneage, the lifting, the transportation of that stuff goes beyond any equipment that's on the island at the moment. So you very quickly run into increased costs for trying to get, a crane on the island that's worth $2 or $3 million for 6 months in order to be able to assemble this stuff. So it's not impossible, but there's a tipping point in terms of scale and repeatability. We've seen it, we've done work with contractors that have used it extensively overseas for things like electrical and plumbing and HVAC type infrastructure, where they'll build the infrastructure in racks and then they come to site and they're hanging the racks down a hallway and connecting them all up. But again, it's a question of scale. In terms of alternate methods of construction, I think the architects, engineers, planning deserve a fair amount of credit, because Bermuda construction has actually evolved a fair bit, in particular in probably the last 20 years, I'd say. Whether that's the move from almost exclusively slate roofs to almost exclusively, the styrofoam profile style roof, or the moves from sort of a traditional cementitious plaster to the synthetic plasters that are more waterproof and that are more flexible. Even sort of window designs and all the rest of that. For me, the biggest challenge that we see, and there's a lot of thought and energy being put into sort of energy efficiency, whether that's insulation or whatever, but the data that I'm seeing suggests that we have very low energy consumption to begin with, so I don't think there's a lot of gains to be made there anymore. I think the biggest challenge I see from a sort of design, construction, behavioral standpoint is that traditionally our codes have always thought in terms of a building being ventilated. So, whether that's ventilated roof space, ventilated attics, ventilated underfloors, those sorts of things. But they didn't anticipate the amount of air conditioning that we have now. So because of that, you have thermal differences that weren't part of that. So where you have dew points and condensation and humidity problems, and therefore dampness, molds, and all that sort of stuff is a different challenge than was contemplated, I think, originally. And I think that's from a health, and then people try to overcompensate by running air conditioning more, which makes the problem worse. So I think that's the biggest challenge for us from a technological perspective, is really figuring that stuff out and getting our head around it.
Oh, awesome. Great answer. Questions back, Mr. Brown.
I see Eureka there, so I'll be very brief. Ran out of time. Roger Brown here from Clarion. Initially, I was thinking about going rant style and then question after, but it'll be more so observational and then a question after. So I haven't been here a little bit over a year, coming from Toronto. I firmly believe, Bermuda is kind of a place where you've proved, on occasion that build and they will come, and I'm a testament of that. The international community is a big evidence of that. But when we talk about, EEZs, we need to think about intensification. There's a lot of professionals here in the built environment, especially in real estate. We talk about location, location, location. You look at, places like Manhattan that has the most value per square foot in the world. It's because people want to be there, work, live, and play. And I find, here in Bermuda, the work piece is their unemployment rate is around 4.5%. People have to live to go to work. But we kind of seem to miss the dial a little bit on the play part. And when I'm saying play, I'm not talking party, nightclubs, that kind of stuff. We're talking things that are, help you, again, a phrase, buzzword, which is work-life balance, that help you kind of balance that work and life part. And as we build, communities, we got to think about the demographics of the future and what work-life balance or work-live-play means for them. So then that comes to my question around planning. And when we're talking planning, what is that play aspect that we infuse in planning to make sure that our communities are well balanced from a social fabric standpoint. Hopefully this makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, I guess that's me. So I touched upon the City of Hamilton plan earlier, and you were talking about live and play. I mean, the whole premise and the starting point for us with the City of Hamilton plan was this city turns into an absolute ghost town when everyone leaves work. This is atrocious. So, when we huddled together and kind of had these initial brainstorming sessions, we're like, how do we build policy into the plan that encourages folks to come forth with development proposals that enable development to change the city, to draw people to come to the city, not just out of necessity purposes, like, oh, I gotta go pay my bill or return my library book, or, how do we get people to come to the city because they want to come and spend time in it? Oh, let's go hang out in the city on Saturday. Let's go and do this on Sunday. I mean, yeah, okay, we have events like Beat the Couch. I just did that on Sunday. Great, go have coffee at Brew afterwards. Nice. But then after that, it all just dies off again. So it's like, how do we get creative with planning policy to kind of, push that agenda? And that's what we're doing with the City of Hamilton plan, which is about to get debated next week, I might add, in the House. So we are super excited to get to a space where this plan will become operative. So just, I don't know if that answers your question directly, but it's certainly something that we discuss on a regular basis. And as I mentioned, it was kind of the ethos behind the whole new City of Hamilton plan.
It does, and you're seeing, and just another 30 seconds, you're seeing a lot of folks, locals, expats included, that they're taking that disposable income on the plane to Miami, to Toronto, to New York, where we can be stimulating local economy here on weekends and spending time feeding young entrepreneurs and their businesses here in Bermuda. So it is crucial.
Awesome. Great question. Thank you, Roger. Any other questions before? I think it's.
I think we can only take one.
Okay,
So go ahead.
he's got the mic already. Sorry, sir, in the blue shirt. Keep it
No
all right.
problem. Can everyone hear me? Is it on? My name is Eric Henderson. I'm with a firm called XCBG and another firm called Synergy. We've financed billions of dollars in projects around the world. And of the 3 U.S. Export-Import Bank deals that have been done here in Bermuda, I've done 2 of them. So Mr. Thomas made a point. There's a number, 70,000, 75,000, 64,000, whatever that number is, that people have to get behind. And then there's a need of 2,500 units minimally. I think it's probably, that's 25% of what the need is based on my observation. My antagonistic question or statement to my neighbor next to me is, was anyone aware that the United States government would guarantee Bermudian bank lending to lower the rate, extend the terms and the rates, and for people like Mr. Fagundo who are importing materials already, shouldn't it make sense for some of those materials to be subsidized by the United States government so the build cost, the build rate, material supply, and speed of construction be done? Now, I will say, I will put this boast out here. I raised $519 million for 4 of the bidders on the hospital, so over $2 billion, and one of my bidders won. So though there is an investment appetite from around the world, including from the United States, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, that when investors and developers consider Bermuda, they want people to consider that there may be other materials, other approaches that don't require scale. So again, the United States government through the U.S. Export-Import Bank provides guarantees to any bank in the world where the developer or builder will use U.S. products and services. So if no one in the room is aware of that, that is the case. And I've been championing that for the 27 years I've been married to my lovely Bermudian wife.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for the food for thought. You see it, right? You're gonna have a line. You're gonna have a line, but I think with that, I just got the tap on the shoulder. So I just want to give everyone a round of applause to our great panelists today.